I'm not the host anymore.
Now Matt is the host.
Now Matt is the host, but you're still able to hear me?
Now you're the host again.
Look at that, Matt. The
Mhm.
computer likes you, it seems.
I'm in the
Now
first.
Matt is the host again.
Now Matt keeps getting the host.
Now
Okay.
you.
I think that's a sign that we gotta do this class in your house one time, Matt.
Maybe you got a sticky key.
Okay. So I think now we're all set, and I apologize for that shaky introduction to this morning's class. So that brisa that said that the beginning time is when the poor people come to eat their bread, and the end time is when the poor people finishing their bread, is a clear contradiction to both parts of our Mishnah, or seems to be a clear contradiction to both parts of our Mishnah, because in our Mishnah it said that the start time is when the Kohens eat their truma. And in that brisa, it says the start time is when the poor people eat their bread. The end time, according to our Mishnah, the earliest end time is a third of the night. The later one is midnight, and the third one is all the way till the morning. It doesn't take a long time for a poor person to eat their meal. So the end time, according to that brisa, when the poor people finish eating their meal, would be very small, a very short window of time that you have to say Shema. So the Gemara said the end of that brisa, the second clause that says that the end time for saying Shema is when the poor people finish their meal. That is definitely a contradiction to our Mishnah. However, we're trying to figure out, is the beginning time that is cited in that brisa, is that for sure a contradiction with our Mishnah? Maybe we could say that the time of the poor people eating their food and the time of the Kohens eating their truma is the same time. So to dispel that notion, we brought in another brisa, which is a third set of opinions, which said the beginning time of saying Shema is when the people start eating on Friday night. The end time of saying Shema, I don't remember what it said, but it said at the beginning of the time to say Shema is when the people, regular people, start eating their food, eating their meal on Friday night. Their Friday night Shabbos meal, that is the time of saying Shema. That is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. The rabbis argue, and the rabbis who in our the rabbis argue, and the rabbis say that it's the time when the Kohens eat their truma. So now is where we got to the Sudoku part of this. If we say that the time of poor people eating their bread is the same time as the regular people eating their meal on Friday night, then that cannot be the same time as the Kohens eating their truma, because the rabbis argued on Rabbi Meir and they said it's not the time when people start their meal on Friday night, it's the time when the Kohens eat their truma. However, if we say that the time when the poor people eat their meal is a different time than the regular people eat their meal on Friday night, then we could say that the time the poor people eating their bread is the same time as the Kohens eating their truma. So we have here three times, and the question is: are any of them the same, or are all of them different? Time number one is when the Kohens eat their truma. Time number two is when the poor people eat their bread. Time number three is when regular people start eating their meal on Friday night. We know that the time when regular people eat their meal on Friday night is not the same time as the Kohens eating their truma, because the rabbis argued on Rabbi Meir and they said, no, the time of starting Shema in the evening is not when the Kohens is not when the regular people eat their meal on Friday night, it's when the Kohens eat their truma. So what we suggested last week is that the Kohens eating their truma has to be one time, and the poor people eating their bread and the regular people eating their meal on Friday night are one time. Why? Because poor people don't have a lot of light. They don't have a lot of money for oil. On Shabbos, your candle's going to go out as soon as your oil finishes. Nobody wants to eat in the dark. If you're eating in a restaurant and the lights are off, the food is not going to taste nearly as good as if you can see, right? Presentation is half of what makes you feel full, maybe even more. Presentation is very important in order to see what you're eating, to feel full. So on Friday night, people have to eat their meal before the lights go out because you can't add more oil on Friday night. It's Shabbos, you can't kindle a flame. The poor people want to eat their meal before the candle goes out because once their candle goes out, they don't have another candle. So the Gemara suggested that the time of poor people eating their bread and the time of people eating on Friday night is the same time because they both have the same reason for why they're eating at that time, which is they want to eat while it's still light outside. They want to eat or before the sun goes all the way down, before the stars come out all the way, because they want to make sure that they still have light while they're eating their food. And that brings us to where we're holding this morning, where we're going to challenge that idea. So let's share screen, go to the Gemara. And we're here where it says 12. Does everyone see my screen?
No,
I just
there it is.
there it is. Yeah.
Okay. So let's just scroll down a little bit. Rather, what we said previously must be rejected, and instead learn from this, that there is a separate time for the poor person and a separate time for the priest. So the poor person has one time when he eats, and that's a different time when the priest starts his terumah. However, this conclusion is based on the assumption that the time of the poor person and the time of people on Friday night are the same time, right? The whole reason why we said that poor people and the time of the Kohen eating his terumah and the time of the poor person eating his bread cannot be the same time is only because we decided that the time of the poor person eating their bread is the time that regular people eat their meal on Friday night. But if we separate those two times, then there's nothing saying that the time of the poor people eating their bread cannot be the time that the Kohens eat their terumah. So let's go into it. That too can be rejected with the assertion that no, the time of the poor person and the priest are one and the same time. And the time of the poor person and regular people on Friday night are not the same time. And if we say that, the opinion expressed by the Tana in our Braita is identical to that of the other Tanaim, and only Rabbi Meir disagrees with them. So if we can find a way to say that the time of the poor people eating their bread is the same time as the priests eating their terumah, then we have almost everyone agreeing on the beginning time of saying Shema. And that's what we want to do, because we want to limit arguments as much as we can. We know Rabbi Meir and the rabbis argue that Rabbi Meir says it's the time of regular people eating on Friday night, and the rabbis argue and they say, no, it's the time when the Kohens eat their terumah. So those two opinions cannot fit together. But if we can say that the poor people eating their bread is the same time as the Kohens eating their terumah, we would much rather say that, because then we have less arguments. So the Gemara is suggesting over here, the Talmud is suggesting, that perhaps the time when people, whatever reason you want to give, the time that the poor people eat their meal, will say is, maybe we could say, I don't know, do you have any ideas why you would say that the time of eating, of the poor people eating, is nightfall, as opposed to the time where people start eating on Shabbos, which would be before nightfall, before the stars emerge?
Their workday finishes later, or?
That's exactly what I was thinking. A poor person is going to work all the way until he can, but only when night falls. and there's no more people in the streets to sell stuff to, then he goes home to eat. But the people on Friday night, I mean, everyone's hungry on Friday night. We want to start as early as we can. So if you give such, go ahead.
I thought we agreed that a poor person was a beggar. Didn't
I
we?
think we did agree on that, but maybe we were wrong.
So a beggar isn't got to work till as long as he can. He'll only beg as long as there are people on the streets.
Oh, yeah, that's also, yeah, very good. You see, we're going through Talmudic analysis over here and seeing if we can all agree. Yeah, so maybe the beggar also, even if he's a beggar, he can only beg so long as there are people in the streets. And he will beg all the way until there's no more people in the street, which is the nighttime.
Which is why the regular people leave for, and if it's Shabbos, oh, we're not talking about Shabbos, we're just talking about the other days.
Right, so a poor person on a regular day or regular people on Shabbos on Friday night.
Yeah.
So if we can give another reasoning, which I think you guys both gave great reasonings, as to why the poor people would be waiting all the way until nightfall, then we can say that the poor people wait until nightfall to eat their bread, which is the same time which is when the stars emerge, which is the same time as the Kohanes can start eating of their truma. And Rabbi Meir is the only one who's arguing and saying that it's an earlier time, the time when people start eating their meal on Shabbos.
Wouldn't it be easier just to say that the Shema should be said before you have your evening meal, whoever you are?
I think that would be way too simple.
That'd be nothing to argue about, right?
First of all, it would be nothing to argue about. Second of all, it wouldn't give us the reward of learning Torah. Right? The more Torah there is, the more we can stretch our minds and try to figure out what's going on. The more reward we get, and the more of God's Torah we have in our mind. So now the Gemara is going to actually wipe everything on its face. You ready? Frag the Gemara, as we say in Yiddish. The Gemara asks a question. And is the time of the poor person and the priest the same? Can you really say that the time of the poor person is the same time as the time of the priest? You can't say that. The Gemara raises a contradiction to this approach from another brisa, in which other opinions regarding the time for recitation of the evening Shema are cited. So let's just think about those poor students who were sitting in the study hall trying to figure out what's going on. And all of their friends are bringing sources left and right. Why you can't say this, you can't say that. And we're getting more and more times invited into the discussion, explaining when is the time for saying Shema. Okay, so we have now another brisa, another source. Again, the brisa is an authoritative text, but not as authoritative as the Mishnah. It's from scholars who lived at the time of the Mishnah. So the Gemara raises a contradiction to this approach from another brisa, in which other opinions regarding the time for the recitation of evening Shema are recited. And here's how the brisa goes. From when does one begin to recite the evening Shema? Right. So let's just pause for a moment. When we read our Mishnah, we thought everyone agrees on the beginning time of saying Shema, and the argument is only on the end time of saying Shema. And now we're getting more opinions and more opinions and more opinions, and it seems like there are even more opinions of when's the right time to start saying Shema than there are on when's the right time to end saying Shema, or the window closing for when you can say Shema. Okay. So from when does one begin to recite the evening Shema? And the answer is from the time when the day becomes sanctified on the eve of Shabbat. This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer, who established an earlier time for Shema. So Rabbi Eliezer says that the time of saying Shema begins at the time of Shabbos. When does Shabbos begin? Anybody know what time of day? Not the time on the clock, but what is the identifying feature?
Sunset.
Sunset. What comes first, sunset or the emergence of the stars?
Sunset.
Sunset. So Rabbi Eliezer says that you can start saying Shema already from sunset. Rabbi Yehoshua, like our Mishnah says, from the time when the priests are eligible to partake of their terumah. Rabbi Meir says, the time for the recitation of Shema begins before the priests were purified, from when the priests immerse themselves in order to partake of their terumah. So remember, we said the priests have to immerse themselves, and after that, they have to wait for the stars to come out. And when the stars come out, even if they didn't bring their sacrifice yet, they can already eat terumah. So the priests immersing themselves to partake of their terumah is before nightfall. So this Rabbi Meir, again, we have to remember that this Rabbi Meir is the same Rabbi Meir who said in the other brisa that the time is when people start eating their meal on Friday evening. So over there, he said it's the time when people start eating on Friday evening. And over here, he says it's when the priests immerse themselves to partake of their terumah. So let's just keep that in mind. So we have here three opinions. Rabbi Eliezer says sunset. Rabbi Yehoshua says the emergence of the stars, which is when the priests are eligible to partake of their terumah. And Rabbi Meir says when the priests immerse themselves to partake of the terumah, which is earlier than when they're allowed to eat the terumah. Now here comes an interesting conversation. Rabbi Yehuda, do you see where I have my mouse over? Rabbi Yehuda?
Yep.
Middle of the page. Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Meir, how is it possible that the time for recitation of the evening Shema corresponds to the time of the priest's immersion? How could you say that you say the evening Shema when the priests go to mikvah? Do priests not immerse themselves during the day, so that with nightfall and the onset of a new day, they will be purified? If so, how can that time be called night? When are the Kohens going to mikvah? The Kohens are going to mikvah during the day. So when the new day comes, they'll be purified and able to eat their terumah once the stars come out. So if they're going to mikvah, that means it's still the daytime. Because if it's already the nighttime, then it counts, their mikvah counts for the next day, and they have to wait until the next evening to eat their terumah. We following?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're calling this time, the Kohens have to go to mikvah during the day, and then in the next day, or the next night, the next evening, they can have their terumah. If you're calling the time that the Kohens are going to mikvah the daytime, if you're calling the time when the Kohens go to mikvah the nighttime, then when the stars come out, they're not allowed to eat their terumah because they only went to mikvah the following day. The mikvah only counts for the following day. So Rabbi Meir did not answer. We just left off with Rabbi Yehuda's question, which seems to be a very strong question on Rabbi Meir. Opinion number 4, Rabbi Hanina says that the time for recitation of the evening Shema begins when the poor person enters to eat his bread with salt. Rabbi Achai, and some say Rabbi Acha, says from the time when most people enter to recline at their meal during the week. Okay, so we have how many opinions in this Mishnah, in this brisa, sorry?
Five.
Very good. We have 5 different opinions in this Mishnah. And again, all 5 of them must be different times, or else they wouldn't be bringing their 5 different reasons. Right? You wouldn't argue with someone about something which is the same time. So time number 1 is sunset. That was Rabbi Eliezer, when Shabbat comes in. Rabbi Yehoshua said, like our Mishnah, from when the priests are eligible to take of their terumah. Rabbi Meir says, no, it's earlier than that. It's when the priests immerse themselves to partake of their terumah. Rabbi Yehuda argued on that. Rabbi Yehuda said, if you're calling the time of the priest's immersion the nightfall, then they're not going to mikvah during the day, and they would have to wait for the next day in order to eat their terumah. So he doesn't agree with that. Rabbi Hanina said that it's when the poor person enters to eat his bread with salt, and Rabbi Achai, and some say Rabbi Acha, said from the time when most people enter to eat their meal. Like Steve wanted to suggest, your name is Zalman, right?
Yes.
Finally got it. Zalman wanted to suggest that the just say Shema from whenever you're going to eat your meal. Okay. So let me ask you this. Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Hanina, are they arguing or are they agreeing? We have to say they're arguing. Now, what did Rabbi Yehoshua say?
When the priests immerse themselves in order to partake of the teruma.
Very good. That was Rabbi Meir from the time that the priests immersed themselves. What did Rabbi Yehoshua say?
Says from the time when the priests are eligible to partake of their teruma.
Very good. The time when the priests are eligible to partake of their teruma. What did Rabbi Hanina say?
The Shema begins when the poor person enters to eat his bread with salt.
Very good. Are Rabbi Hanina and Rabbi Yeshua arguing?
No, they're just saying different. They're just using different points of time, but they're not arguing.
Different points of time, right? So if they were using the same point in time with a different reference, that would be superfluous and they wouldn't have to say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that we have these two opinions in one Mishnah means that they're talking about different times, right? References for different times. So can we now say that the time of the poor people eating their bread with salt is the same time as the Kohanes eating their truma?
Is that a third time?
So let's continue on with the Gemara.
No, because we already said that the poor person is gonna eat when there's still light. So that means that he isn't gonna eat when the priests eat.
Oh, very good question. If the poor person has to eat while it's still light outside, then he can't eat, then it's not going to be the same time as the priests. But then afterwards we decided that the poor, in other words, then afterwards we decided that the poor people eat when it's already nightfall. And I guess they had some candles. So this is all suppositions of when does the poor person eat. So the preceding, what we just said, was the text of this brisa. Returning to our question, if you say that the time of the poor person and the priest are one and the same time, then the opinion of Rabbi Hanina is identical to that of Rabbi Yehoshua. However, the fact that they are cited together in the same brisa indicates that they are not, in fact, the same. Rather, one must conclude from this that the time for the poor people is separate to the time for the priest is separate. So, whoever was the student over there in the Gemara said, don't we see a clear proof from here that the time of eating is at the time of the poor person eating is a different time than the time of the Kohanes eating their teruma? And no objection was raised to that. Everyone was silent and agreed. So the Gemara concedes then, indeed, conclude from this. So we now have a conclusion that the time of saying Shema, that the time of the poor people eating their meal and the time of the Kohanes eating their teruma cannot be the same time. So we went on a long journey over here just to decide whether the time of the poor people is the same time as the time of the Kohen, and we concluded, no, it's separate times. But it is possible that the time of the poor people eating their meal is the same time as people eating on Shabbos, on Friday night. However, it's a different time than the time of people eating during the week. So we now have many, many different pointers and references in time when is the proper time to start saying Shema in the evening? And now the Gemara asks the wonderful question that we always wanted to know. Which time comes first? Which time comes second?
Mhm.
And we're not going to get into all of them yet. We're going to start with the poor person and the Kohen. Maybe we'll get into all of the other opinions later. So the question is like this. Having established that the time of the poor person and that of the priest are different times, the Gemara seeks to determine which one is later. Are the poor people later or are the Kohens later? The Gemara suggests that it is reasonable to conclude that the time of the poor person is later. Because if you say that the poor person is earlier than the Kohens, it would be impossible to establish a time earlier than that established by Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yehoshua said, let's go back over here. Rabbi Yehoshua said, from when priests are eligible to partake of their truma. So if the poor person is earlier than the Kohens, so we know the Kohens are nightfall. If the poor person is earlier than nightfall, when is earlier than nightfall? Sunset. If the poor people begin to eat their meal at sunset, then Rabbi Hanina, who said that it's talking about the beginning of Shabbos, which is sunset, is identical to that of Rabbi Eliezer, who said the poor people, which is sunset. In other words, the only earlier time, halachically, that we have over here, at least so far in our discussion, it goes sunset, emergence of the stars, then we have complete nightfall, and then we have into the night. So if the Kohanes start eating their teruma at nightfall, and we want to say that the poor people are earlier than nightfall means sunset. But we already have Rabbi Hanina, who said that sunset is the time when Shabbos comes in, and that is the time when you can start saying Shema. So rather, must one not conclude from this that the poor person is later?
Why does that follow? I don't see how that follows.
Okay, how about this? It's 11:17, so let's pause over here and we'll pick this up. We'll pick this up next Tuesday. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Perfect.
you.
So just to a quick summary of what we had today, we tried to figure out, can we say that the time of the Kohanes eating their teruma, which is nightfall, is the same time as the poor people eating their bread with salt? And our conclusion was no, you cannot say that they're the same time, because we have one brisa that listed 5 different opinions of when's the right time to start saying Shema. And one of those opinions was the Kohen eating truma, and another different opinion was the poor people eating their bread with salt. So we have to say that those are 2 separate times. And the brisa that said the Kohen's eating the brisa that said that the time is the poor people eating their bread with salt is a contradiction to our Mishnah that said it's the time of the Kohen's eating. And we're leaving off with a question. Let's look back at those 2 times. The poor person eating their bread with salt and the Kohen eating his truma. Which one comes earlier? Which one comes later? And that's what we're going to answer next week.
And you can open-end this question too, Rabbi. Why is it so based on people actions? Why isn't it more based on the clock and the sun and the sundown, more of a standard time? Why is it so based on the whether it's the Kohanim or the poor people eating?
That is a very good question. It's a very good question, and in fact, it's a question that has been asked here before, and I think was even asked Today, maybe in passing, but right now, a beautiful answer came to me, a much better answer came to me than what I answered last time. So I'm going to ask who thinks that they can answer this question. Why are we talking about people and what people do, and we're not talking about a time on the clock?
Because the time changes all the time.
Oh, okay. So we can't use a time on the clock, but what about a time in the night sky? Some kind of a marker. Is
That
it the
you
emergence
can
of the
use.
stars, sunset, sundown? Why are we hanging it on actions of people and then trying to translate when are those actions of people into the night sky? Why don't we just start with the night sky? Any ideas? What were the words in the Torah that taught us that we have to say Shema in the evening and in the morning? I think Steve mentioned this in the beginning. The Torah said when you lie down and when you rise up is the time for saying Shema. The time for saying Shema is when you lie down and when you rise up. So we're trying to figure out what is the time when most people lay down.
Lay down when most people rise up. Mhm.
So that's why this is all dependent on human actions, because we're trying to figure out what is considered the time when people lay down, what is considered the time when people rise up. And then once we figure out when is the time that most people are laying down, we can translate that into a time in the night sky, and we can have our answer.
Huh. So it's almost like a consortium of times, because many people all rise at different times. Not everybody gets up to work at 7:30. Not everybody gets up to work at 8 o'clock.
Well, in those days, everyone got up at sunrise and went to bed. There were no lights, so people lived during the daylight hours. So everyone got up at dawn or a little bit before dawn, and then went to bed as soon as they had dinner.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Okay, very good point, Steve.
I'm sure there were slackers back then and bums back then. Who,
Yeah, those were the poor. Those were the poor people, the beggars we've been talking about.
What about the kings?
Well, who cares about them?
Okay, so these are all good discussions that we're gonna get into as we progress. So yeah, it does depend. The question is, and then the question also is it the actual time that people go to sleep, head to sleep, or is it the time while people are sleeping? So that was why we had that Bryce. I'm going to stop share over here. Remember, we had that Bryce that said that it's from the time when the poor person starts eating their bread until they finish their meal. So that one would be of the opinion that you only have to say Shema while people are actually going to sleep. Once people are already sleeping, it's too late. Whereas the opinions in our Mishnah seem to suggest that so long as people are sleeping, you can still say Shema all the way until dawn. Good questions. Again, I'm sorry about this morning, and hope that he is okay. And thank you all for joining. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your discussions, for your inputs, for your questions, for your answers. We'll see you all next week, Tuesday. But before then, I want to put a plug. This week, Wednesday night, so tomorrow night, I'm giving a class on the Golem of Prague and his legendary tales. Did they really happen? It's a class that I gave on Shavuos that was thoroughly enjoyed by all. So I decided I'd offer it to everyone over Zoom. Send me a text. Those of you who have already sent me a text or an email requesting to join, I will send you the link. And those of you, if you have not yet and you would like to join, send me a text or an email, and we'll get you in tomorrow night, 7:30. Take care. Have a wonderful day.